Chapter 1, The Breaking Point. Ryder had always been the guy who showed up. The one who answered texts at midnight when someone's car wouldn't start. The one who lugged furniture up 3 flights of stairs without complaint. The one who never asked for anything in return. It wasn't a role he auditioned for, it just happened. And for years, he thought that was what friendship meant. Being there, no questions asked. But lately, he'd started wondering if he'd misunderstood the script. The January sun was sharp and bright as Jason parked his car in front of Tyler's house. The cookout was supposed to be casual. Burgers, beers, and catching up. But Jason felt a knot in his stomach as he killed the engine. He wasn't sure if it was hunger or dread. Probably both. He grabbed the 6-pack from the passenger seat and walked toward the backyard, rehearsing the smile he'd need to wear. 8 months with Kaylee, and things had been great even until the last few months when every hangout turned into a roast session starring Ryder. His best friend Dean was the ringleader, tossing out embarrassing college stories like confetti. Jason could take a joke, sure, but lately it felt less like teasing and more like sabotage. He pushed open the back door, stepping onto the deck, and the world exploded into pain. Something hard and metallic slammed into his skull. His knees buckled, the 6-pack clattering across the wood as his vision went black around the edges. For a second, he thought he'd been shot. Then the sting of cold water hit his face, mixing with the warmth of blood trickling down his temple. Voices gasped. Phones hovered like vultures. Jason blinked hard, forcing the blur into focus. A metal bucket lay beside him, dented and dripping. Above the doorframe, a precarious perch where it had clearly been balanced, until gravity turned a prank into a weapon. He was on his knees, blood painting his cheek, and every face in the yard was frozen in horror. Dean, Tyler, Megan, the whole crew, and Kaylee, her chair scraping back as she bolted toward him, panic etched across her face. Jason's thoughts crystallized in a single perfect moment of clarity. This wasn't an accident. Maybe the injury was, but the intent, the laughter, the phones, the setup, it was all part of the same game. The same slow erosion of respect he'd been feeling for months. By the time he staggered to his feet, Kaylee was halfway to him, hand outstretched. He raised his palm, stopping her cold. "Don't," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The yard was silent except for the drip of water from the bucket. Jason scanned their faces, people he'd called friends for years, and felt something inside him snap. "Was it as funny as you hoped?" he asked, his tone calm, almost conversational. That made it worse. No one spoke. Dean's eyes darted like a trapped animal. Jason locked on him. "You win, Dean," he said, voice steady. "She's all yours. I hope it was worth it." Kaylee's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jason looked at the rest of them, blood streaking down his jaw like war paint. "You're all dead to me." Then he turned, walked through the side gate and didn't look back. The drive to the ER was slow and careful, every bump sending a jolt through his skull. He kept the radio off, the silence thick enough to choke on. 8 months with Kaylee, years with these friends. And now, all of it felt like ash in his mouth. He didn't know if Kaylee had been in on the prank or just an unwilling spectator. He didn't know if Dean's smirk was guilt or panic. He didn't know much of anything except this. Ryder wasn't a man who made rash decisions. He'd hear her side. Then he'd decide. Chapter 2, Fallout. The antiseptic smell of the ER clung to Jason like a bad memory. He sat on the edge of the paper-covered exam table, head throbbing in rhythm with the fluorescent lights above. A nurse had cleaned the gash, muttering something about lucky it wasn't worse, before disappearing to fetch the doctor. Jason stared at the floor tiles, each one a perfect square, like they were mocking him with their neatness. His phone buzzed for the 10th time in 20 minutes. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Kaylee. The screen lit up again. Kaylee Trenton calling. Jason let it ring out, jaw tight. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Every time he pictured her face, wide eyes, mouth open in shock, he felt a twist in his chest. Was it guilt, fear, or something worse? Betrayal? The doctor came in, brisk and efficient. "Small concussion," she said after shining a light in his eyes. "You'll need stitches, 6, maybe 7. No strenuous activity for a few days. And someone should keep an eye on you tonight." Jason almost laughed. Someone should keep an eye on him. Sure. Maybe Dean could volunteer, right after he finished editing the footage for TikTok. The stitches were quick, the discharge instructions long. Jason nodded through them, barely listening. When the nurse handed him a packet titled, "Living with a Concussion," he almost asked if there was one for living with backstabbing friends. By the time he stepped out into the cold night air, his phone had racked up 17 missed calls and 5 texts. "Kaylee, Jason, please answer. I didn't know. I swear. Kaylee, where are you? Are you okay? Kaylee, please talk to me." Jason shoved the phone into his pocket and walked to his car. The silence inside was a relief, like shutting a door on chaos. He sat there for a long moment, forehead resting against the steering wheel, breathing slow. He wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. Rage was easy. This was heavier, quieter. Disappointment had weight, and it was crushing him. Finally, he unlocked the phone and typed a single message. "Jason, I'm fine. We'll talk tomorrow." He hit send before he could second-guess it. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and half-formed thoughts. 8 months. That's how long he'd been with Kaylee. Long enough to imagine a future, to talk about apartments and shared furniture and whose Netflix account they'd keep. Long enough to believe she was different. He didn't know if she'd laughed. He didn't know if she'd filmed it. He didn't know if Dean's smug grin was just Dean being Dean, or Dean being something worse. Jason pulled into his driveway and killed the engine. The house was dark, quiet. He sat there for a moment, staring at the porch light he'd never gotten around to fixing. It felt symbolic somehow, his life, flickering at the edges. Inside, he dropped his keys on the counter and sank onto the couch. The stitches tugged when he leaned back, a sharp reminder of the day's events. He closed his eyes, but the image replayed anyway. The bucket, the phones, the frozen faces. He'd been the guy who showed up, the guy who helped, the guy who never asked for anything. And tonight, when he needed something, just respect, just decency, they'd given him humiliation instead. Jason opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he'd hear Kaylee out. He owed her that much. But after that, he wasn't sure what he owed anyone anymore. Chapter 3, the conversation. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and quiet apologies. Jason sat at a corner table, nursing a black coffee that tasted like burnt resolve. He'd chosen the place deliberately, neutral ground, far from the orbit of their shared friends. No chance of Dean strolling in with that grin that made Jason want to break something. The bell over the door jingled, and there she was. Kaylee looked tired. Not in the messy hair, slept-in late way, but in the way someone looks when they've been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. Her eyes scanned the room, landed on him, and softened with relief. "Jason," she said, crossing the space like it was a battlefield. "God, are you okay?" He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." She did, sliding into the seat with a nervous energy that made the sugar packets tremble. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. Jason broke it first. "You didn't answer my question last night." Her brow furrowed. "What question? Was it as funny as you hoped?" His tone was calm, but the words landed like stones. Kaylee flinched. "Jason, no. God, no. I didn't know. I swear, I had nothing to do with that." He studied her face, searching for cracks. "You didn't laugh?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was a knife. "I was shocked. Everyone was laughing at first. But then, when the bucket fell, I ran to you." Jason leaned back, the stitches tugging against his scalp. Dean set it up. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I think so. He was acting weird all day. But Jason, I didn't know. I would never what?" His voice sharpened. "Would never join in? Would never let them turn me into a joke." Her eyes glistened. "You're not a joke." "Funny?" Jason said, a bitter smile curling his mouth. "Because that's all I've been for months." Kaylee reached across the table, fingers brushing the edge of his hand. He didn't move. "Jason, I love you," she said softly. "I don't care about Dean. I don't care about any of that. I just want us to be okay." The words hung between them, fragile and heavy. Jason wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But belief wasn't easy when trust had been cracked like glass. He pulled his hand back, slow and deliberate. "I need time," he said, "to think." Her face fell, but she nodded. "Okay, time." Jason stood, dropping a few bills on the table. "I'll call you," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. As he walked out into the cold, the bell jingled behind him like a punctuation mark. Outside, the air was sharp, biting at his skin. He breathed it in, trying to clear the fog in his head. He didn't know what hurt more, the bucket or the doubt. Chapter 4, the clean break. Jason stared at his phone like it was a ticking bomb. The group chat, the crew, was still buzzing with notifications he hadn't opened. He didn't need to. He could imagine the messages. Half-hearted apologies, jokes disguised as damage control, maybe even Dean's smug attempt at humor. He scrolled through the names, each one tied to a memory. Tyler, who Jason helped move 3 times in 2 years. Megan, who called him at 2 a.m. when her car broke down in the rain. Dean, his best friend since college, the guy who knew every secret, every weakness. The guy who turned those secrets into punchlines. Jason's thumb hovered over the screen. Then, with a calmness that surprised him, he tapped Leave Group. The silence that followed was deafening. No more pings. No more digital reminders of loyalty gone wrong. He opened his contacts next. Dean's name stared back at him, old and familiar. Jason didn't hesitate. Block. The phone asked if he was sure. He was. One by one, he pruned the list. Not everyone, just the ones who'd been there yesterday laughing while he bled. It felt surgical, precise, like cutting out rot before it spread. When he was done, Jason set the phone down and exhaled. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge. He looked around at the space, his space, and felt something unexpected. Relief. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was the first breath of freedom he'd taken in months. He spent the next hour pacing, thoughts ricocheting like pinballs. 8 months with Kaylee. Was that salvageable? Could trust be glued back together once it shattered? He didn't know. What he did know was this. He couldn't keep orbiting people who treated him like a utility with a punchline attached. Jason wandered into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the barren shelves. A half-empty bottle of ketchup. A lonely carton of eggs. He laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since yesterday. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it was something. "Guess it's just you and me," he muttered to the eggs. He cracked 2 into a pan, watching them sizzle. The smell filled the apartment, warm and simple. It felt good to do something ordinary, something that didn't involve bleeding on a deck while people filmed for likes. As he ate, Jason pulled out a notebook, a habit he'd abandoned years ago, and started writing. Not a journal, not exactly. Just thoughts, lists, things he wanted to change. 1. Stop being everyone's emergency contact. 2. Start saying number 3. Figure out what makes me happy. He stared at the third line for a long time. What did make him happy? He'd been so busy being useful that he'd forgotten how to be joyful. Jason closed the notebook and leaned back, the stitches tugging slightly. He winced, then smiled. Pain was temporary. Boundaries were permanent. Tomorrow he'd call Kaylee. He owed her that conversation. But tonight was his. Chapter 5. Enter the curveball. Jason wasn't expecting company. He wasn't expecting anything. Really. Just a quiet Saturday morning with coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and a playlist that didn't remind him of anyone. He just settled onto the couch, mug in hand, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Confident. Not the hesitant tap of a delivery driver or the apologetic knock of a neighbor asking for sugar. Jason frowned, set the mug down, and opened the door. She was standing there like a splash of color against the gray January morning. Bright red coat, messy bun, and a smile that looked like trouble. In her arms, a cardboard box teetered dangerously, the flaps straining against the weight of, was that a blender? And a stack of books? And was that a ceramic cat? "Hi," she said, breathless. "You must be Jason. I'm your new neighbor. And I'm about 5 seconds away from dropping my entire personality on your porch." Jason blinked. Hi." The box wobbled. Jason lunged forward, catching it just before gravity claimed victory. "Whoa. Got it. Thank you," she said, relief flooding her face. "You just saved me from a very embarrassing introduction." Jason glanced down at the box. "What exactly is in here? A small library? A kitchen appliance graveyard?" She grinned. "Yes, and also my dignity, so handle with care." Jason chuckled despite himself. "Noted." He set the box inside his doorway, and she followed, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I'm Harper," she said, offering a hand. "Harper Quinn. Apartment 3B. Jason shook it, feeling the warmth of her grip. "Jason Ryder. 3A. "Perfect," Harper said, eyes sparkling. "We're neighbors, which means you're now legally obligated to borrow sugar from me at least once a month." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Is that in the lease?" "Page 12, she said without missing a beat. "Right after the clause about sharing Netflix passwords." Jason laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It startled him. He hadn't laughed like that in weeks. Harper glanced at the stitches peeking from his hairline. "Whoa, battle scar." Jason touched the spot instinctively. "Long story. I like long stories," she said, tilting her head. "Especially the ones that involve buckets and betrayal." Jason froze. "How?" She held up her phone. "Neighborhood group chat. You're kind of famous." Jason groaned. "Fantastic." "Don't worry," Harper said, her tone playful. "I'm reserving judgment until I hear your side. Over coffee. Or wine. Or both." Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, the fact that she'd just invited herself into his Saturday plans, or the fact that he didn't mind. "Coffee," he said finally. "I make a mean French press." "Sold," Harper said, slipping off her coat. "But fair warning, I'm a terrible influence. If you have plans to brew dramatically today, I will ruin them." Jason smiled, feeling something shift inside him. Maybe it was the concussion, or maybe it was the first spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Chapter 6. Awkward encounters. Jason hadn't planned on going out. After Harper left that morning, her laughter still echoing in his apartment like a song he couldn't stop humming, he'd figured the day would end quietly. Maybe some takeout, maybe a movie that didn't involve buckets or betrayal. But Harper had other ideas. "You can't just sit here and sulk," she said, standing in his doorway like a motivational speaker in sneakers. "There's a bar 2 blocks away, and they have trivia night. Trivia is therapy with beer." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure that's not in any psychology textbook." "Page 12, Harper said with a grin. "Right after the clause about sharing Netflix passwords." Jason laughed. Again. He was starting to lose count of how many times she'd made him do that in 24 hours. Against his better judgment, he grabbed his jacket. The bar was warm and loud, the kind of place where neon signs buzzed like lazy bees, and the smell of fried food clung to everything. Harper breezed in like she owned the joint, Jason trailing behind, wondering how she managed to turn every entrance into a grand one. They snagged a booth near the trivia stage. Harper ordered nachos with extra jalapenos because life is short, and Jason ordered a beer, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. He wasn't sure why until he saw them, Dean and Kaylee, sitting at the bar like a scene from a bad sitcom, laughing at something Dean said. Jason froze mid-sip, the glass hovering like a prop in a play he didn't want to be in. Harper noticed immediately. "Oh?" she murmured, following his gaze. "Ex-girlfriend and... is that the bucket guy?" Jason groaned. "That's Dean. The infamous Dean," Harper said, eyes narrowing. "Wow. He looks exactly like someone who would think a concussion is comedy gold." Jason smirked despite himself. "You're not wrong." Dean spotted him then, his grin spreading like oil on water. He nudged Kaylee, who turned, and her smile faltered when she saw Jason. For a moment, the bar noise faded, replaced by the hum of tension. Harper leaned in, voice low. "Do you want to leave?" Jason considered it. He could walk out, avoid the drama, keep his fragile peace intact. But then Dean raised his glass in a mock salute, and something in Jason snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. "No," Jason said, setting his beer down. "I'm good." Harper's smile was slow and wicked. "Attaboy." Dean didn't waste time. He sauntered over, confidence dripping like cheap cologne. "Jason," he said, clapping him on the shoulder like they were still friends. "Man, you look good. Stitches and all." Jason met his gaze, calm and steady. "Dean." Harper slid closer, her presence like a shield. "Hi," she said brightly. "I'm Harper, neighbor, trivia partner, emotional support human." Dean blinked, thrown off by her cheer. Hey." Jason smiled. Not the bitter smile from before, but something sharper, cleaner. "Enjoying trivia?" he asked. Dean shrugged. "Just hanging out." "Cool," Jason said. "Hang out over there." The words were soft, but they landed hard. Dean's grin faltered. He glanced at Harper, then back at Jason, and for the first time in months, Jason saw it, the crack in Dean's armor. Dean muttered something about getting another drink and retreated. Kaylee stayed at the bar, watching Jason with an expression he couldn't read. Harper nudged him. "That was hot," she whispered. Jason laughed, tension melting like ice in whiskey. "Pretty sure that's not in the trivia rules." "Page 12, Harper said, and Jason couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt like he wasn't the punchline. He was the guy writing his own story, and maybe, just maybe, Harper was going to be a big part of it. Chapter 7, Rediscovering Himself. Sunday morning found Jason standing in the middle of his living room, staring at a yoga mat like it had personally insulted him. Harper had texted him at 8 a.m. "You said you wanted to try new things. Yoga is a new thing. Meet me in the park at 9. Don't be late." Jason wasn't sure when he'd agreed to this, but somehow, here he was, rolling up the mat and wondering if his stitches were about to become a cautionary tale on a wellness blog. The park was alive with joggers, dog walkers, and people who looked far too cheerful for a Sunday morning. Harper was easy to spot. Bright yellow hoodie, hair in a messy bun, waving like they were old friends, which Jason realized they kind of were now. "You made it," she said, grinning. "And you brought a mat. Look at you, Mr. Prepared." Jason smirked. "I googled yoga for beginners. It said to bring a mat and an open mind." "Perfect," Harper said. "You've got one of those." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" She laughed, and Jason felt that now familiar warmth in his chest. It was becoming a pattern. Harper laughing, Jason smiling, the world feeling a little less heavy. The instructor was a serene woman named Willow who spoke in tones that made Jason want a nap. The first pose was something called Downward Dog, which Jason quickly renamed Downward Disaster as his arms trembled and his stitches protested. Harper, of course, was a natural. "You're doing great," she whispered. Upside down and grinning like gravity didn't apply to her. Jason groaned. "Pretty sure I'm inventing a new pose called Man Collapses in Public." Harper laughed so hard she nearly toppled over. "That's advanced level." By the time the class ended, Jason's muscles felt like overcooked spaghetti, but his mind was strangely clear. He hadn't thought about Dean, or the bucket, or the group chat, just breathing, stretching, and Harper's laughter. After yoga, Harper dragged him to a farmer's market, because fresh produce is cheaper than therapy. Jason found himself holding a bag of kale and wondering when his life had turned into a rom-com montage. They wandered past stalls of honey jars and handmade soaps, Harper chatting with vendors like she'd known them for years. Jason watched her, fascinated. She had this way of making the world feel less sharp, less heavy. Like maybe happiness wasn't something you chased. It was something you stumbled into while buying artisanal jam. Later, back at his apartment, Jason stared at the kale like it was a math problem. He didn't know what to do with it, but he knew this, he felt lighter. Not fixed, not perfect, but lighter. He grabbed his notebook and added a new line. 4. Try things that scare me. 5. Spend more time with people who make me laugh. He underlined the second one twice. Jason didn't know where this was going. With Harper. With himself. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't dreading the next chapter. He was ready for it. Chapter 8, The Friend Group Fallout. Jason was halfway through chopping kale, still unsure if he was making a salad or committing a crime, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting Harper's usual barrage of memes. Instead, it was a text from Tyler. Tyler, hey man, just wanted to say no hard feelings about the other night. Things got out of hand. Hope you're good. Jason stared at it, the knife frozen midair. No hard feelings? That was rich. He deleted the message without replying, but the knot in his stomach tightened. He knew what this was, the start of damage control. The slow crawl of excuses disguised as apologies. The phone buzzed again. This time, Megan. Megan. Saw Dean and Kaylee at O'Malley's last night. Looked cozy. Just thought you should know. Jason set the knife down, his pulse spiking. Cozy. The word burned like acid. He didn't need details. His imagination was cruel enough. Dean, leaning in with that grin. Kaylee laughing, maybe touching his arm. The same arm that had set up the bucket. Jason gripped the counter, breathing slow. He wasn't angry. Not in the explosive way he'd been at the cookout. This was quieter, colder, like ice spreading under skin. Harper showed up 20 minutes later, breezing in with a bag of pastries and zero awareness of the storm brewing in Jason's head. Emergency carbs, she announced, dropping the bag on the counter. Because kale is not a personality. Jason managed to smile. You're not wrong. She studied his face, her grin fading. Okay, what happened? You look like someone just told you yoga was canceled forever. Jason hesitated, then handed her his phone. Read the last text. Harper scanned it, eyebrows arching. Wow, cozy, huh? That's gross. Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if I care. He stopped, words tangling in his throat. Harper set the phone down and stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. You care, and that's okay. But let me ask you something. Do you want to spend your energy proving them wrong? Or building something better? Jason looked at her, really looked at her. The messy bun, the flour smudge on her sleeve, the way her eyes held his without flinching. Something in his chest loosened. Better, he said quietly. Harper smiled, slow and warm. Good answer. Now eat a croissant before you spiral. Jason laughed, a shaky sound, but real. He grabbed a pastry, the buttery flakes crumbling in his hands. For the first time since the cookout, he felt like he wasn't drowning. He was swimming toward something new. Chapter 9, The Big Gesture. Jason had never been the grand gesture guy. He wasn't the type to rent a billboard or hire a flash mob. But as he sat in his apartment, staring at Harper's text, you need a win. Something that feels like you. He realized she was right. He needed something that wasn't about Dean, or Kaylee, or the wreckage of old friendships. Something that said, I'm not just surviving, I'm building. That's how he ended up at the community center on Wednesday afternoon, pitching an idea to a woman named Gloria who wore glasses on a chain and had the patience of a saint. A charity trivia night, Jason said, leaning forward. Local businesses donate prizes. Entry fees go to the food bank. People love trivia. People love beer. Combine the two, and we raise money for a good cause. Gloria tapped her pen against her notepad. You're volunteering to organize? Jason nodded. I'll handle everything. Flyers, sign-ups, even the playlist. Gloria smiled. You've got yourself a deal. By Friday, Jason was knee-deep in logistics, and Harper was right there with him, armed with a stapler and a level of enthusiasm that made him wonder if she ran on solar power. Okay, she said, slapping a flyer onto the bulletin board. We've got 20 businesses donating gift cards, 3 breweries on board, and a playlist that doesn't include a single sad song. You're welcome. Jason grinned. You're terrifyingly efficient. I contain multitudes, Harper said, tossing her hair dramatically. Now, tell me, what's your team name? Jason blinked. Team name? For trivia, she said. You can't just show up as Jason. That's boring. You need something clever. Something that says, I'm fun, but also devastatingly handsome. Jason laughed. That's a lot of pressure. I believe in you, Harper said, eyes sparkling. Worst case, we go with bucket list. Jason groaned. Too soon. Comedy is tragedy plus time, Harper said, smirking. And nachos. The night of the event, the community center buzzed with energy. Tables filled with teams sporting names like Christopher Nolan and Smarty Pints. Jason stood near the stage, checking the mic, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Pride. This was his idea, his work, his win. Harper appeared at his side, wearing a t-shirt that said Trivia Queen in glitter letters. Ready to crush souls? Jason smiled. Ready to raise money. And crush souls, Harper said, grabbing his arm and steering him toward their table. Come on, Ryder. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate the guy with stitches. The night was a blur of laughter, questions, and Harper whispering answers with the confidence of someone who'd memorized Wikipedia. Jason found himself laughing so hard his cheeks hurt, the weight of the past weeks lifting with every round. When their team won second place, losing by 1 point to the Wizard of Oz, Harper threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. Jason froze for half a second, then hugged her back, the warmth of her body grounding him in a way nothing else had. "You did this," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him. "You made something good happen." Jason swallowed, his throat tight. "We did this." Harper smiled, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded. It was just her, and him, and the spark that had been flickering for days now blazing bright. Jason didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight he wasn't the punchline. He was the guy who showed up for himself, and maybe, just maybe, for her. Chapter 10: The Confrontation. Jason was stacking chairs when he heard the voice he'd been hoping to avoid. Well, look who's running the show. Dean. Jason turned slowly, the hum of post-event chatter fading into a sharp buzz in his ears. Dean stood in the doorway like he owned the place, hands in his pockets, grin plastered on his face. The same grin that had haunted Jason for weeks. Harper appeared at Jason's side like she'd been summoned by instinct. "Friend of yours?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Used to be," Jason said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Dean sauntered closer, eyes sweeping the room. "Nice setup, man. Trivia night for charity? That's cute." Jason didn't flinch. "Better than concussion night for TikTok." Dean's grin faltered just a hair. "Come on, Jace. It was a joke." Jason set the chair down, straightening to his full height. "A joke is funny when everyone laughs. Bleeding on a deck while people film? That's not a joke. That's humiliation." Dean shrugged, but his confidence was cracking. "You're overreacting." Jason stepped closer, voice low but carrying. "No, Dean. I'm done reacting. I spent years showing up for you. For all of you. Every move, every favor, every midnight rescue. And the one time I needed respect, you gave me a bucket." The room had gone quiet. People were watching now, but Jason didn't care. This wasn't about them. It was about him. Dean opened his mouth, but Jason cut him off. "You win, Dean. You wanted to make me the punchline? Congratulations. But here's the thing." Jason smiled, sharp and clean. "I'm not in your joke anymore." Dean blinked. "What does that even mean?" "It means you don't get to rent space in my head," Jason said. "You don't get my time, my energy, or my friendship. You're done. We're done." Harper, bless her, chose that moment to lean in with a grin. "Also, for the record, he's way funnier than you." Laughter rippled through the room, soft at first, then louder. Dean's face flushed, his smirk collapsing under the weight of reality. He muttered something about getting a drink, and bolted for the door. Jason watched him go, the knot in his chest unraveling like a frayed rope. For the first time in months he felt free. Harper nudged him. "That was epic," she whispered. "Like, slow clap epic." Jason chuckled, tension melting like ice in whiskey. "Think I scared him?" "Terrified," Harper said, eyes sparkling. "And honestly, kind of turned me on." Jason laughed, really laughed, and for a moment the world felt bright and wide open. Tonight wasn't just a win for charity. It was a win for Jason Ryder, the guy who finally stopped being the punchline and started being the headline. And maybe, just maybe, Harper was ready to co-star. Chapter 11: The Turning Point. The community center was quiet now, the hum of laughter replaced by the soft scrape of chairs and the distant clink of glasses being washed. Jason stood by the stage, stacking leftover flyers into neat piles, when Harper appeared with 2 paper cups of coffee like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. "Fuel," she said, handing him one. "You earned it." Jason smiled, taking the cup. "Thanks, for everything." Harper shrugged, casual but warm. "You did the heavy lifting. I just provided sarcasm and snacks." Jason chuckled, sipping the coffee. It was lukewarm, but somehow perfect. "You know," he said slowly, "I didn't think I'd feel this good again. Not after everything." Harper tilted her head, her eyes soft but bright. "You mean after the bucket apocalypse?" Jason laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, that, and the fallout. I thought I'd be stuck in that mess forever." "You're not stuck," Harper said, stepping closer. "You're moving forward. And honestly, you're doing it like a champ." Jason looked at her then, really looked. The way her hair had escaped its bun, curling around her face. The smudge of glitter on her cheek from the Trivia Queen shirt. The way she stood like she belonged in his space, like she'd always belonged. Something shifted inside him, quiet but undeniable. "Harper," he said, his voice low. "You've been kind of amazing." Her smile widened, teasing but tender. "Kind of." Jason grinned. "Okay, very amazing." She laughed, and the sound wrapped around him like sunlight. "You're not so bad yourself, Ryder." For a moment they just stood there, the silence thick with something electric. Jason felt his pulse quicken, his breath hitch. He wasn't a man who rushed things, but this didn't feel rushed. It felt inevitable. He set his coffee down, took a step closer. "Can I?" "Yes," Harper said, her voice soft but certain. Jason kissed her. It wasn't fireworks or movie magic. It was better. Warm and real, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. Her hands slid up to his shoulders, his fingers brushing her cheek, and for the first time in weeks, Jason felt whole. When they broke apart, Harper grinned. Well, she said, breathless. That was page 12 material. Jason laughed, forehead resting against hers. Pretty sure that's in the fine print. She smiled, and Jason knew, whatever came next, he was ready. Chapter 12, Happily Ever Awkward. Jason had never been nervous about introducing someone to friends before. Mostly because, until now, his friends had been the same crew that turned his life into a blooper reel. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was introducing Harper to a new circle, a smaller, healthier one he'd started building after the fallout. He'd invited Tyler's cousin, who ran the trivia night with him, plus a couple of neighbors who didn't think pranks were a personality trait. It was casual. Pizza, board games, and laughter that didn't come at anyone's expense. Jason paced his living room, adjusting the snack table for the third time. Chips, dip, Harper's homemade brownies, which she claimed were therapeutic baking. Everything looked fine. Everything felt terrifying. The doorbell rang. Jason opened it to find Harper holding a bottle of wine and wearing a grin that could melt glaciers. Relax, she said, breezing past him. You look like you're about to defend a thesis. Jason chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Just want it to go well. It will, Harper said, setting the wine down. Unless you start the night with interpretive dance. Then we're doomed. Jason laughed, tension easing. Noted. The guests trickled in, easy smiles and warm greetings filling the space. Harper was a natural, chatting with everyone, cracking jokes, making the room feel lighter. Jason watched her from across the table, marveling at how seamlessly she fit into this new version of his life. Then came the awkward moment. Tyler's cousin, mid-slice of pizza, said, So, Jason, whatever happened with your old crew? Haven't seen Dean around. The room went quiet for a beat. Jason felt the old weight press against his chest, but before he could answer, Harper jumped in. Oh, Dean, she said, her tone breezy. He's busy auditioning for the role of guy who loses all his friends. Pretty sure he nailed it. Laughter erupted around the table. Jason stared at Harper, stunned, and then grinned so hard his cheeks hurt. Yeah, Jason said, voice steady now. We went separate ways. Best decision I've made. Harper raised her glass. To better decisions. Jason clinked his glass against hers, warmth flooding his chest. For the first time in months, he felt like he belonged, not because he was useful but because he was valued. Later, as the night wound down and guests trickled out, Harper curled up on the couch beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. You did good tonight, she murmured. Jason smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. We did good. She tilted her head, eyes sparkling. So, what's next? Jason looked around his apartment, the laughter lingering in the air, the crumbs of brownies on the plate, the woman beside him who turned his world upside down in the best way. Whatever we want, he said softly. Harper grinned. Page 12. Jason laughed, pulling her closer. Always page 12. Chapter 13 Epilogue. Jason Ryder had never thought a bucket would change his life. But as he stood on his balcony months later, coffee in hand and Harper humming softly inside his apartment, he realized it had. Not in the way Dean intended, not as a punchline, not as humiliation, but as a turning point. The bucket had knocked more than sense into him. It had knocked loose the truth. He'd been giving everything to people who gave nothing back. He'd been the guy who showed up for everyone but himself. Not anymore. Jason glanced at the notebook on the table, the one he'd started the night he cut ties with the old crew. The list was still there, pages filled with scribbles and crossed out lines. Stop being everyone's emergency contact. Done. Start saying no. Done. Figure out what makes me happy. Still in progress, but Harper was a damn good start. Inside, she laughed at something on her phone, the sound spilling out like sunlight. Jason smiled, feeling that warmth settle deep in his bones. He'd learned something important. Happiness wasn't about being the hero in everyone else's story. It was about writing your own, and finding someone who wants to co-author. Jason took a sip of coffee, savoring the quiet. Then his phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood group chat. Harper, reminder, yoga tomorrow. Don't be late, or I'm bringing a bucket. Jason laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Some jokes he thought were worth keeping.